it. And where do you learn it? In small groups. Because if you have 5 children in a group, and 3 to 5 I believe is ideal. No more than that, because it starts going negatively. Less than 3, you're not going to have much conversation occurring. So 3 to 5 is a great size group. And in the 3 to 5, now let's say I have 5 children. I have 1 shot out of 5 to get to talk. That's pretty good odds. What about circle time? 1 out of 18. You see the difference? So if you're trying to develop language, small groups are where it happens. Another one. One of the skills that we need for the 21st century is collaborative skills. We need to learn how to collaborate because that's how we're going to be doing things in the future. And again, it's much easier to be cooperative if you have 3 than if you have 18. So small groups allow that. Also practicing social skills. 3, much better. I can't hear you. What did you say? They'll say that to each other. And so the child who's not speaking loud enough or with particular, they get told. But they learn that if they want your peers to hear you and talk to you, you need to speak up. You see? And it's learned in a real kind of experience. They are constantly constructing their own knowledge. Now, this is one I really think is important because you've heard me talk this morning about critical thinking, practicing skills. Children need to learn how to make choices. Have you ever met a 40-year-old who can't? I'm always amazed when I work with a 40-year-old or 30-year-old or whatever who can't make a choice. I don't know what I think. I don't know what I should do. I don't know how. We start choices small and we build. Which center do you want to go to today? A small choice, but nevertheless a choice. We had a little boy who came in from a very structured classroom, never made choices. And he sat down with these other children who'd been in a classroom where they'd had centers and choices for a couple of years. And so the teacher went around and said, which center would you like to work in today? And the child would get their name tag and they'd put it in the right place. And there's so many management systems, and she got to him and she said, which center would you like to go to? He said, I don't know. I don't know which center to go to. Which centers are open? See, he'd never had that choice before. And ultimately, she had to give him what we call limited choices because he was too overwhelmed with the choices of all the centers. So he was asked, would you like to go to home living or to blocks? And then he could make a decision. But it was painful. I watched him. It was painful. I don't know if that's right. I don't know if I made the right. So we don't wait till somebody's 14 and say, would you like to learn to drive? We start back when they're little. And we give them choices. And they build their what we call creative confidence in being able to make choices. I have to tell you, I get ribbed about this one a lot. I believe that children should be responsible. It's my own little quirk. My daughter told me one time I overdid responsibility. She said, I'm the most responsible person in the world. And I'm thinking, is that bad? But I believe that you start learning how to be a responsible person and taking care of your room. And I mean the classroom. You clean tables. You sweep up. You put things away. Because when you are in a community, you must help care for the community. And how do you learn that? by doing it. In early childhood, we believe that play is a way of learning, right? Hey, more hands than that, come on. Because we know from all of the theorists that young children think through play and that they need the opportunity to do things in their play that will help them structure and learn every day. So play is what we've already talked about, and I'm not going to mention all of these, but I do want you to notice the last two. Persistence. People say to me, little children don't have a long attention span. Yes, they do. It depends on what they're doing. If they're interested in it, they will stay with it for a long time. I watched a little 5-year-old boy making masks, and he was cutting out these teeny tiny little intricate parts in the art center. Just amazing. I'm thinking, how did he do that? I don't think I could cut that out. And he's making this fancy, and he says to the teacher, she says, it's time to go outside. And he just keeps right on making his little pieces. And she says, Tom, we need to go outside. And one of the little girls comes over to him and brings him something to eat. He's getting hungry, she says. She's noticed he's really working hard. And he puts his little hands to his head and he said, I can't stop right now. My head is too full of ideas. Whoa. That's what we want, right? But what a shame to stop him in the middle of that. And we'll talk a little bit about timing. Now, this is exploratory play, and I'm going to talk to you about, I hope you'll get some ideas. This is actually a sand tray that's in the art area, and the teacher has, these are all from real classrooms with real teachers, and they have allowed me to take some great pictures. He has all kinds of choices here. You see all of his choices? There are these little containers sitting on the side, and he can decide for himself what materials he wants to experiment with in the sand. And so he tries one thing, and then he tries another, and he tries another. He explores sand with these tools. Symbolic play. According to Piaget and also Sarah Smolansky, this is one of the highest levels of play. This is where children take on roles and they begin to pretend they're someone else. And they begin to empathize with other people. This little girl is taking care of a baby. It's not a baby doll. It is a baby. You may think it's a baby doll, but it's not. It is a baby. And one day when she was taking care of the baby, another little girl that was in the group started crying like she was the baby. And the little girl that you see here kept trying to calm her. It's okay, you'll be all right. And then she said to the other little girl, I don't think I can stand another minute of screaming babies. And we have to believe that for one fleeting moment, she empathized with Mama, who has a crying baby for many hours. But she's taking on a role. Now think about the high level of intellectual activity that is. I'm moving from my own self to being someone else. And I must act as this other person. Use the language of this other person. You see the thinking that's going on? In sociodramatic play, which is supposed to be the highest level, there's role playing, they use language, they work cooperatively, they're persistent on task, and they adjust their roles as they are playing. So it's all of this learning that's taking place. Now, for some reason, when I say something, people say, oh, okay. But when the American Academy of Pediatrics speaks, everybody goes, oh. And they said, play is essential for helping children reach important social, emotional, and cognitive milestones. Whoa, I couldn't have said it better myself. It helps children deal with stress and become resilient. Wow. It strengthens their ability to cope with problems and issues. And you know, play therapy is used a lot with children who are really having very severe emotional issues, or if there's a crisis or a catastrophe. They use play therapy with them because it is a way of working out problems. Now, this is the block area. What do you notice different in this block area? All right, there's hard hats. What else is there? There are girls. Guess what? Girls need to be in blocks. Girls need physics. Girls need to be there. And sometimes little boys can be pretty dogmatic. Girls don't belong here. I had one little boy who said, girls don't belong here. And I said, wait a minute. Why not? And then he goes. This is the true story. He goes to the shelving. He pulls out a box. And on the box, there are only pictures of boys building with blocks. And of course, you know, he's a non-reader. So he says, see, it says right here, no girls in blocks. Now, sometimes you and I think, oh, well, that doesn't really make any difference, so there's no girls on the blocks. It does make a difference. The other thing that's mentioned that's here that you may not have had in your block area before is electrical wiring. This is a great thing to put in the block area because you can build it and move it and stretch it and make all kinds of interesting shapes with it. Again, it is a novel material, something they haven't worked with before. Now, I have a little trouble with the word free play. What does free play mean to you? I think it pretty much mentions that when you say to parents, oh, they're in free play. What does that mean to them? They're just wild and crazy and running around and nobody knows what in the heck they're doing. And I would like for us to think of it more as guided play, because it is guided. If you set up a center, you're not going in there and telling them what to play, but you are guiding it by the way you design that center, by the materials you put there. And you are a floater. You know what a floater is? How many of you know what a floater is related to centers? You just kind of move around and watch what's going on, go where things need to be done, help people where they need to be. So what we're talking about is not really free play. It's really more guided. So think of it that way. Now, what is your role as a teacher? Selecting the center. I put in my Learning Center book, I always forget how many there are, over 40. Now, am I suggesting to you that tomorrow you go back to your classroom and you set up 40 centers in your classroom? No, I'm giving you choices. You can look at those and choose the ones that are appropriate for your children. Now, there are some what I call traditional centers that are usually in most early childhood classrooms, and we'll talk about some of those. You decide where you're going to put it. Where is it going to be? Quiet things together, noisy things together. You collect the materials that will go there. And sometimes, I know this is hard to believe, that there are children who don't know how to play. Are you having more and more of those children? How many of you are? Show me. I'm hearing that more and more from teachers. The kids just don't know how to play. And so sometimes we actually have to move into the role of being the player in the play. Now, what you have to be careful about is that you don't take over the play. I watched a teacher with all good intentions who went into home living, and the children were going nowhere in their play. And she sits down and she just kind of takes over. Well, I think we'll have this for supper, and she rattles off a menu. Guess what the children did? They left the center. If you want to have that for dinner, lady, just have a way. We're moving on. And they didn't say anything ugly to her. They didn't correct. They just left. So be careful. Remember when you go into play alongside of them that you take an insignificant role and you don't try to direct the play too much. You're just there to help them with it. And you want to talk. If I had one thing I want you to remember from today about centers, after center time, you need to come back together and you need to talk about what center did you work in today, what did you do, etc. Because how many times has a child built the most beautiful skyscraper ever created and they never tell anybody about it? So this is a time to come back. I've had teachers that will let them draw what they did in centers, others dictate, but you need to talk to them about what it is that they did in play. And you have to have a management plan. It is not free for all. We have a management plan. We talked about floaters. This is your perfect opportunity to document real learning. If children are sorting the cans by size in home living, you need to write down who was there, what time of the day it was, and who sorted them that way. Because when you later want to put it in their records or talk to their parents, now you have evidence of what they've done. I think we'll just skip right. In every center, you need to know why you're doing it. You need to know what the materials you need. And I believe every center should have literacy opportunities. So we'll talk about those. Grouping noisy things together. The two noisiest areas are blocks and music. Those are noisy. So put them next together. You don't mix together. Put them together. Now here's some traditional centers. Now look at these and see which one of these you have in your classroom. Blocks. How many of you have a block area in your classroom? I think that there should be blocks in classrooms in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, because one of the best ways that you learn mathematical concepts is with blocks. And the other thing that I found out, I did some research comparing all the different centers, because I'm interested in oral language development. More language occurred in block centers than any other center. And I'll have to tell you, I was a little surprised about that. because you don't think of that often. You see the knocking down and the building up, and you don't get so much of the language. But what I found was that in blocks, it can be whatever you want it to be today. So over 15 weeks of tape, I saw foxes' dens, a garage, a skyscraper, a highway, a hospital. See, whatever the children were interested in that day, they were able to follow their interest. And so it made it very effective learning technique. Don't forget the small motor skills. They're very important, and that can happen in blocks as well as some of the other centers. Look at his concentration. I mean, he is really focused on doing this. And we talked about those, small motor. Okay, got all those right. Now, when a center's kind of not working, can you do to it? You might need to add some props, some literacy materials, just all kinds of interesting things. This is another traditional one. Now, instead of calling it the art studio, the more current name is the studio. And that comes from the Reggio Emilia programs, where they use the artillerista. But since we can't say that very well, we call it the art studio.